Hello, friends. Welcome. This week, I'm talking to Brenda Davis, registered dietitian, and she talks about how to truly control type 2 diabetes. And these are lessons that she gleaned from her randomized controlled study in the Marshall Islands, a population that's plagued by out of control blood sugar. She also talks about what supplements we absolutely need for all of us and new evidence about how much protein we need as we age. And you might be surprised. And you should be taking note about aging well from Brenda because at 66 years old, she can still do everything that she did at 30 years old, including handstands and the splits. She's incredible. Well, thank you for listening. And if you'd like to help the podcast continue to grow, please rate and review us on Apple and Spotify. I truly appreciate it. And don't forget, you can now watch the podcast on YouTube and Spotify. And feel free to leave comments. I love hearing from you. Thanks for listening. Hi, friends. I'm Lauren Bernick, and I'm flipping the script about growing older. My guests have been influencers since before that was even a thing. Welcome to the Anti-Aging podcast. Welcome to Age Like a Badass Mother. Brenda Davis, a registered dietitian, is a leading plant-based pioneer and an internationally acclaimed speaker. She is widely regarded as a rock star of plant-based nutrition and was referred to as the godmother of vegan dietitians by Veg News. She has been a featured speaker at medical, nutrition, and dietetic conferences in 27 countries on 6 continents. As a prolific nutrition writer, Brenda has authored or co-authored 13 books with nearly 1 million copies in print in 12 languages. Her most recent works include Plant-Powered Protein from 2023, Nourish, the definitive plant-based nutrition guide for families in 2020, Kick Diabetes Essential 2019, and the Kick Diabetes Cookbook in 2018. She has also authored and co-authored numerous peer-reviewed journal articles. Brenda was the lead dietitian in a diabetes randomized controlled trial in the Marshall Islands. The results paper was just released in September, which we'll be discussing. And in 2022, Brenda was the 7th recipient of the Plantrition Project's Luminary Award. She lives in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Please welcome Brenda Davis.
Well, thank you so much, Lauren. It's really lovely to be here. I'm excited to be part of this amazing podcast.
Oh, thank you. Well, I mean, I say this all the time, but I think you really are a badass mother. You can you tell us how old you are? Is that okay?
Oh, of course. I will be 66 next month.
Oh,
So,
wow. I mean, it's funny because in one of our emails, I asked if I could ask your age, and I said, I think you're really aging well. And you said, I am. And I'm like, I really admire that because sometimes we're like, oh, well, thank you. I'm like, you tell us, Brenda, you get it. So share, spill it. Like, what's your secrets? Give us some secrets of aging well right off the
well,
bat.
yeah, for me, I think some of the most important aspects are to live a purpose-driven life. Be kind, be positive. That's really important. And then make healthy lifestyle choices. So, eat a healthy diet, make physical activity a part of your daily routine. Do everything you need to manage stress and be mindful and avoid addictions. And I think one of the most important things is to stay socially connected. So those
Mm-hmm.
are all things that I think are really important to aging well.
Mm-hmm. And is I guess your purpose is what? To let people know about living a
My
healthy lifestyle?
my purpose is really about making the world a more compassionate place.
Mm,
I want people to be healthier, but I want them to be making conscious choices that will leave the world better, kinder, healthier. And so everything I do in terms of my career has been to help people, those that want to do this, that want to choose a whole food type plant-based diet, uh, to ensure that they and their families can do it very well, and be joyful and love their food, and all of those things in the process.
Mm. That's close to, do you know Victoria Moran?
Oh yes, of course, Victoria is a legend.
Yes. I mean, do you personally know her? I'm
Oh
sure
yes, I know
yeah.
her well.
She it reminds me of pretty much what she said, the compassion and making the world a more compassionate place. And um I guess that's ahimsa, right? Just
Absolutely.
can you
Absolutely. And the funny thing, Lauren, is I think that a lot of us, who aspire to making the world a more compassionate place, we're just born wanting to make it a more compassionate place. I can remember when I was a little, like 3, 4, 5 years old, if I would see a snake on the ground, I'd pick him up, I'd talk to him, I'd ask him how his day was going.
Oh my god, that's me.
Yeah, exactly. That's you. That's Victoria too, I'm sure. That's how we roll. And my son
Yeah.
was the exact same way. Like
Oh
he,
my
I
gosh.
can remember when he was 2 years old, a friend of his stepped on a spider on purpose, and you would have thought somebody cut off his right arm. He was
Oh,
just distraught, screaming, just like couldn't believe someone would
oh,
do that. And so I think there are many of us that are just born with a compassionate soul, and we just
yeah.
get it from an early age.
Yeah, it's true. But, I didn't come to veganism until about 10 years ago. But I was a vegetarian most of my life because,
Yeah.
well, since I was a teenager, mostly on and off, but mostly. And I think that I did kind of make that connection. And I was just saying this the other day. I feel like until you really stop eating animals,
Yeah.
you when you're still eating them, you kind of have to put your blinders on because you can't
Oh,
really think about it,
absolutely.
right?
Otherwise, you're an immoral person, and you can't really live with that very easily. And
Mm,
most of us, as we're growing up, we just get desensitized to the plight of these, food animals, and
mm,
because it's tradition, it's culture. But of course,
mhm.
tradition and culture don't justify anything. They didn't justify slavery, and they don't justify the, horrible abuse, of food animals. So I think
Yeah,
that, and it's hard to recognize and accept that, like you say, when we're actually consuming them.
yeah.
So, yeah, no, I couldn't agree more.
And, obviously not to shame anybody if they're listening to this
No,
and they eat animals because, that's not the point. We don't want to shame anybody. It's
no,
just,
no, because we were there. We were
uh,
there.
100%, absolutely. And so, just like your good friend Juliana Hever was saying, just eat more plants. That's the first place to start.
Absolutely, eat more plants, and every little tiny baby step you take towards making more, kind and conscious, choices is a choice worth celebrating. It's
Mhm.
not, you don't have to, it's not all or nothing. You do
Yeah,
what you can do that works in your life at this
yeah,
moment.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So speaking of Juliana, she was on a few weeks ago, and she started talking about how there's new evidence that we need more protein especially as we age. And it just kind of goes in the face of everything that we've been saying for a long time. Like, if you're getting enough calories, you're getting enough protein. And I know she was a little bit hesitant to put it out there because she's just now really getting into this and finding the research, but I think you've been researching it more, haven't you?
Yes, well, the last book I co authored was a book called Plant Powered Protein. And I did this with my usual co author, Fasanto Molina, and my son, Corey Davis,
Mhm.
who has expertise in the environmental side of things. And yes, the evidence is overwhelming. It's so strong now that as we get older, we need more protein, that most health authorities in the world recommend higher levels of protein for older adults. And the usual, we usually see around 1 to 1.3 grams per kilogram body weight. And of course, the RDA for adults is 0.8. And so most people now agree that that's not enough for older adults. And the reason is really simple. We just don't, we're less able to digest and absorb protein from our food as we get older, but we're also at higher risk for muscle wasting and, all of those things where a little bit of extra protein might help to preserve muscle mass and help you to avoid sarcopenia and frailty and so forth. I actually have had a number of clients or patients who have come to me saying, I'm not sure why, but I'm losing my hair. My skin is really thin.
Mm-hmm.
I bruise easily. I just don't feel as strong as I used to. And every doctor I've asked about protein says, oh, you eat a whole food plant-based diet, you're getting plenty of protein. It's not protein. Don't worry about it. And in most cases, I say, okay, tell me what you eat. What's a typical intake? Well, of course, as we get older, we tend to eat fewer calories. And so what I'm seeing is these individuals eating a wonderful diet. They're having their steel cut oats and their salads and their grains and legumes and vegetables and fruits and all of those healthy foods, some nuts and seeds on top. And it adds up with their limited caloric intake to about 35 to 45 grams of protein a day. Well, for most of them, they need more like 60 grams a day, especially if we're going for 1.2 grams per kilogram body weight. And so they're falling short. And as soon as we correct that, and it's so easy to correct, their symptoms all start to reverse. And I've seen this over and over again. So we think that we think that there is no such thing as protein deficiency in the
Yeah,
developed world,
that's what
and
we've been
that
told.
we've been told if you eat enough calories, you get enough protein, and
Right.
that's almost always true, but it's not necessarily true for people who are older, especially women who are older who are eating a limited number of calories. And so they get, the skin fragility and the hair loss and the brittle nails and the muscle weakness and the fatigue and the hair loss and the mood changes and the inability to fight infections and poor wound healing. And doctors don't recognize it as insufficient protein. They're not suffering from marasmus or kwashiorkor, these severe protein deficiencies, but they're not getting enough protein to build and rebuild their body tissues. And they tend to need a little more leucine, and they need, their needs change as they get older. And so, when I look at a diet and I see someone having a bowl of, steel cut oats with some blueberries and a few maybe walnuts on top, and they're having a little bit of almond milk with that, I'll get them to cook the steel cut oats in soy milk instead and have it with soy milk and boost and then add a tablespoon or two of hemp seeds and boost the protein by probably 15 grams at least at breakfast, just by doing a couple of really simple things, not changing the meal, but making a few simple swaps. At lunch, if they're having their big salad at lunch, I'll get them to add a half a cup of tofu cubes, a few pumpkin seeds. And that can boost their protein by 15 to 20 grams at that meal. And, so little swaps and little additions can make a really big difference. And so, most of these women that are 35 to 45 grams a day, I get them to 60 to 70 very, very easily. They don't need to add animal protein. They just need to focus a little more on more concentrated sources of plant protein, like legumes and tofu and tempeh and these kinds of foods, and seeds like hemp seeds and pumpkin seeds, and a little less perhaps on the bread and grains and, replacing some of those calories with the more protein dense calories. And that seems to work really well for most of these individuals.
Okay, so let's define older, or how do we know when we get to the point where we need more protein? Is it something that we
Yeah.
see hair loss, or
Well,
like my skin is getting thin, but I thought that was genetic.
yeah, and
It's
it
like
could be genetic
paper.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
but so most of the recommendations, for example, in Australia, their recommendations are for people 70 plus, and they recommend 25% more protein once you hit 70,
oh,
25% more. And there are a number of countries, probably at least 10 countries in Europe, that recommend in the range of 1.0 to 1.5 grams per kilogram body weight. And though those recommendations pertain to people 65 plus. So the recommendations will be slightly different in different countries, but generally, I would say somewhere in the range of 60 plus is what we're
okay.
talking about. Yeah.
So is it going to hurt you if you're like 50 to start adding in more
Oh, not at
protein?
all. Not
Okay.
at all.
Um,
And especially if you're a physically active individual,
mhm.
you may need a little bit of extra protein anyway. So to help, build and maintain your muscle mass. And I have to say, I don't want to be braggy or anything, but honestly, my muscle mass, I don't think is any different than when I was 30.
Oh,
My
wow.
muscle definition is as good. I'm as strong. I can still press as much weight. And, I can still do most of the things that I could do when I was 30, like headstands and handstands and the splits and, those kinds of things I
That's
can still
awesome.
do. And I think I'll still be able to do them when I'm 80 because I just
That's
continue
great.
doing them. But I also continue my exercise regime is pretty strong. Like I do
What do you do?
this. Well, I do something every day. This morning I did a step class and then a yoga class.
You
I
did two
do.
classes?
I do two, maybe 3 times a week. I do yoga, so I'll do my aerobic or strength training every day. And my favorite is classes. Sometimes I go for a run or a ski or like a cross country ski or a canoe or something like that because I do love doing some activity outdoors. But I do like I love kickboxing. I love
Wow.
step. I love all of the HIIT classes and the body power or group power classes. I love all of it. It's all
Oh my
great.
gosh.
And I love yoga. So I do at least one class every day and sometimes two. So
Wow.
I'm physically active.
Well, you
I
sure are.
yeah.
You're not joking. Okay, I gotta step it up a little. This morning I did my Drina Burton fascia flow, and then I rode
Awesome.
my spin bike for 30 minutes, and then that's all I did. But I did,
But that's
yes.
awesome.
Well,
That's
and
awesome.
yesterday I did, yoga and I walked, but um okay, I got to step it up. I've never done a hit class. I'm so like intimidated by that, but I
You
think
know
I could do
what?
it.
If you go and do it, you do not have to be intimidated because one of the things about the classes is just people of every age and every fitness level. We have a man that comes to our HIIT classes who's
And that's
probably
high
80,
intensity
high
training. So
intensity
people,
interval
if they,
training.
yeah.
He's probably 83 or 84, and he just does his level. And
Mhm.
so everybody does their level, and you never have to feel like eyes are on you. People are focusing on what they're doing, and it's just fun. And we all love that we have some older adults in the class who are just doing their best to do what they
Yeah,
can. Yeah, it's
that's true.
awesome. Yeah.
Okay. I will try and do that. Let's move on to your paper that we just talked about, the type 2 diabetes paper for the Marshall Islands. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. So this was quite a project. So people that aren't aware of this project, I was invited to be a part of this research team and really to develop the nutrition protocol for this lifestyle intervention. And the Marshall Islands, for people that aren't familiar or never heard of the Marshall Islands, they are an extremely remote set of islands. Somewhere between Hawaii and Australia. There's nothing within 2,000 miles in any direction. So they
Wow.
were actually used as atomic bomb testing grounds after the Second World War because they're so
Ah,
remote.
yes, yes.
So people might be familiar with that. But
Mm-hmm.
they, 100 years ago, the people lived off the land. They just ate fish and plants, whatever they could get growing on these atolls. And so it was a lot of coconut and breadfruit and pandanus and these kinds of foods. And there was no diabetes. I mean, you can imagine they had to work really hard
Sure.
to get their food, and there was nothing processed. There was no processed foods. And so today, these islands could sustain maybe, the biggest island, maybe 500 or 1,000 people. Well, there are 30,000 people on Madro now. And so they have to import foods, and the people are poor. So guess what they import? They import, UPF, ultra processed foods that are things like white sticky rice and ramen noodles and spam and a lot of
Mm.
sweet drinks. Their biggest drink there is luau, and the first ingredient is high fructose corn syrup.
Oh.
The kids' favorite snack is ramen noodles, and to flavor them up, and they just eat them dry out of the package. They sprinkle some Kool-Aid powder on top to give them a boost of
Oh.
flavor. So I know it's just, and they eat a lot of cake donuts and white soda biscuits, and it's just a lot of meat, a lot of white rice, and their fiber intake is probably 5 to 10 grams a day if they're lucky now. So it's just really, you couldn't design a diet to induce diabetes better than the diet they've adopted, and so the diabetes rates are among the highest in the world.
Mm.
And Polynesians tend to be very metabolically efficient. They're designed to survive famine, so they get overweight and they get metabolic diseases more quickly than the average Caucasian.
Right.
And so it's just people have just been ravaged by type 2 diabetes, and the number one surgery on the island is amputations due to diabetes.
Oh no,
So
that's so
yeah.
sad.
Oh,
That's
it's just
terrible.
it's just so sad. So we went in and we did a randomized control trial where we randomized people to usual care for diabetes or this very, I would say, intensive lifestyle intervention where they were fed a whole food plant-based diet. They were, lots of exercise, and we touched on all of the pillars of lifestyle medicine in the education portion of the program. People were with us for the first 2 to 4 weeks, 5 days a week for close to 8 hours a day. I mean, it was really, really intense. And as the program went on, so we followed them for 6 months, but the program lasted 3 months really. And while they were doing the program, the results were just amazing. So we saw average drops in blood glucose of over 70 milligrams per deciliter in the first couple of weeks. A1Cs dropped about 2 points on average by 12 weeks, which is just phenomenal
Hmm.
results. And, of course, everything else, their insulin resistance started to reverse. We saw reversal in, I think it was about 23% or something of the people that had an A1C over 8. So complete remission. So
Incredible.
yeah, it was really nice results. And of course, this is a population that relies very heavily on fish. As they did, now a little less so because they're eating a lot of chicken and spam and so forth. So we did our plant-based diet for the intensive portion of the program, but the foods they were permitted to eat at home were plants and fish. But we had a limitation on the fish that it had to be prepared without added, it couldn't be fried, or it
Right.
needed to
No
be
oil.
poached, or yeah, it
Hmm.
just needed to be prepared in the healthiest way possible.
Another reminder, because I think anybody who listens to this podcast regularly knows type 2 diabetes can be very well reversed with a whole food plant-based diet. But I think that, people just out in the world who are eating a standard American diet, their doctors will tell them, like, no, you can't eat fruit, you can't have carbohydrates, and it's just so backwards.
It's really disturbing, and we have now probably 8 or 10 reviews and meta-analyses that have provided convincing evidence that plant-based diets aid in weight loss, they improve insulin sensitivity, they decrease blood glucose levels, they improve blood lipids, they reduce our needs for medications, they reduce the risk of complications of diabetes. We know that diabetes can be driven into remission with a healthy diet and lifestyle changes. And actually, even the most conservative organizations like the American Diabetes Association, the Endocrine Society, the European Association for the Study of Diabetes, Diabetes UK, they came together and provided a definition for remission, which is an A1C of less than 6.5% at least 3 months after the cessation of glucose-lowering medication. And so this is not something that's debated in scientific circles anymore. It's very well accepted. We know that diabetes can be driven into remission. The big question is, what diet is the best for achieving remission? And so, and to me, any diet that provides a caloric deficit can produce weight loss. And weight loss is critical to driving diabetes into remission because it's driven by fat accumulation, or, it's driven by inflammation, oxidative stress, dysbiosis, but lipotoxicity is probably the biggest player, which means you're storing fat in places it shouldn't be stored. Mm-hmm. So we have adipose tissue that can store unlimited amounts of fat. But when your body gets overwhelmed with too many calories, it ends up storing fat in your liver and in your pancreas and in your muscles and all of these places. And when you store fat in your liver it causes your body to become insulin resistant. When you store it in your pancreas, it destroys your beta cells. Your pancreas has no tolerance for storing fat. And so when we can get weight reduction, it's unbelievable. There was a study that used a super low calorie liquid diet. It was like 850 calories a day, like 825 to 850. And people that lost at least 15 kilograms or 33 pounds, 86% of them went into remission. People that lost 22 to 33 pounds or 10 to 15 kilos, it was about 57%. And it went down and down and down as people lost less and less weight. And so very good evidence that diabetes, and that was the direct trial, and this is a very famous trial. But people say, well, what diet is really best for weight loss? And as I mentioned, you can lose weight eating Twinkies if you eat few of them, like 800 calories worth or whatever. But the diet that is really best for weight loss is a diet that minimizes your risk of death and disease and the complications of diabetes. And that's where plant-based diets really shine, because they are anti-inflammatory. They have a lot of antioxidants. They have a lot of fiber that promote a healthy gut microbiome. They reduce the chances of lipotoxicity. They support healthy body weights better than other weight loss diets. And so that to me is really the clincher, is you don't want to be eating a diet for weight loss that causes you to get cancer or causes you to have complications of diabetes. You want a diet that supports optimal health and well-being.
Exactly. Yes. Okay. Well, and then it helps you age well because you're going to not have those diseases.
To me, it's not really controversial in mainstream medical and dietetic circles anymore that plant-forward, at least, diets are the most healthful diets.
Aren't you so excited to be able to say something like that it's not controversial anymore?
It's not. And I can tell you, when I started along this path in 1989, it was controversial.
Oh, yeah.
So, I can remember being really afraid of being a dietitian and being a vegan because
Mhm.
I didn't know if there was another vegan dietitian on the planet. It was just unheard of. We were
Yeah.
taught in school. When I was 1978, 1979, I can remember being in university and being taught that our vegetarian diets were considered risky and vegan diets were considered downright dangerous. And they
Unbelievable.
were incorporated in our textbook in a section called fad diets. And that's all we learned about plant-based diets is they were to be avoided, our plant exclusive diets especially. And so we have come a long, long way.
Yeah, we've come a long way, but what's interesting is that I think on your website it has your favorite quotes, and they are from famous vegans or vegetarians like Ben Franklin, Albert
Yes,
Einstein, Pythagoras. Like these are deep thinkers
yes.
who were ahead of their time, who realized this. And I love those quotes. People should go to your website and check that out.
I do too. I just love
I
those
I
quotes.
love it. Okay, so give us what I like also is that you're going to give us the pitfalls and where we could, mess up and what we have to be aware of. So,
Yeah,
what do we need to watch out for
yeah,
on this kind
absolutely.
of?
And I think one of the greatest disservices that we can do to our community is to pretend that all you have to do is eat whole foods and all will be well. Because what happens when we don't get enough of certain nutrients or we don't get enough of the nutrition we need is we become exhibit number one for why people are justified eating meat.
Mhm.
And so we need to have all our I's dotted, our T's crossed. We need to get this right. So when you see an infant with B12 deficiency and irreversible brain damage, it hits the front headlines of newspapers, and what gets blamed is vegan diets get blamed.
Mhm.
It's not, they don't blame a parent who is not knowledgeable and who's underfeeding their child or whatever the case may be. They blame the vegan diet. We don't
Mhm.
do that with omnivorous diets. We don't see a malnourished
Right.
child who's eating McDonald's 3 times a day, and blame it on the omnivorous diet. But we
Yes.
do that with vegan diets. And so we are really on trial in the eyes of the world. And so we need to get this right. And it's not that difficult, but there are some potential pitfalls. And we need to recognize them and we need to take care of them. And
Okay.
as a society who, are, we're wanting to leave a softer footprint, we're wanting to be more compassionate, we're wanting to be healthier. Plant-based diets make sense. So, when we had shortfalls with omnivorous diets, like vitamin D, we just added it to cow's milk, or if we were short on iodine, we added it to salt. We added folate to flour and other things or folic acid really
Mhm.
to increase that in the diet. So there's lots of nutrients we've added to foods for to ensure omnivorous diets provide all the nutrients we need. We
So
need to do the same for plant-based diets. And
what are
so
we like short on?
yeah, so
Calcium,
so
vitamin D,
yeah, so
what is it?
the potential nutrient shortfalls are number one, vitamin B12, because vitamin B12 is a nutrient that is made by bacteria. And so it will be found in animal products that contain the bacteria.
From
It will,
soil, right?
yeah, and it will be in maybe a little bit in unsanitary food. So, like if you make tempeh in an unsanitary condition, you might get some B12. But generally, we tend to like to make sure our food supply is clean. It is fine for
It's
most
fine. You like
people.
the
For
I'd use the
methyl,
spray.
yeah, the methylcobalamin is fine as well. It's less stable, So you might need to take a little more of it and maybe take it every day instead of just twice a week like you would with cyano. So we're looking at 1,000 micrograms twice a week for younger individuals. For people 65 plus, most experts say 500 to 1,000 a day.
Okay. I
But
keep
what
mine in the fridge, my spray, and then I spray it under my tongue every morning when I
Yeah,
open my fridge.
which is great. And
Okay.
the thing is that to me, if you're vegan or you're 100% plant-based, it's not a bad idea that when you get a medical checkup and lab test done, get your B12 done. Just
Okay.
know where you're at, because sometimes you end up riding quite high
Yeah.
with
Yes.
supplements, and so you can say,
Yes.
well, maybe I can cut it back a little. So if you know where you're at, that
Yeah.
makes
It's
that
good to
easy
get
to
that
do.
tested. What else are
Exactly.
we low on? Iodine, zinc.
Yeah, so the other nutrients that we need to consider are vitamin D, especially if you live in a cooler climate for even part of the year. But
Okay.
vitamin D, everybody's short of vitamin D,
Sure.
not just plant-based eaters.
And
But
D3.
D3 tends to be it tends to work a little better in terms of
Okay.
keeping your vitamin D status up. Now, the other thing to know is that there is one food that's in the vegan world that is actually can be an excellent source of vitamin D, and that's mushrooms. And so but when you buy mushrooms in a store, you don't know if they've been exposed to UV light, which will make them vitamin D sources. But what you can do is you can actually buy regular button or portobello or whatever kind of mushrooms you're buying. And during the warm months, you can put them gills up in the sun for 10 to 15 minutes. And that will bring the level of vitamin D up to
Really?
one serving it give you as much as you'd get from 8 eggs. It's unbelievable.
Wow.
And it
I
will
never
last
heard that.
it will last in the fridge for like 7 or 8 days. The vitamin D remains quite stable, and so that's just a really simple way of boosting vitamin D in your food. But most people need a supplement, so
I
I
love that.
suggest 1 to 2,000, 1 to 2,000 IU's. Uh, um, per day for most adults. That's reasonable. And then beyond B12, vitamin D, the other things to think about are calcium. If you use a calcium fortified non-dairy milk, it's generally not a problem to get to the RDA for calcium, but we do need to be conscious of calcium sources. And so for leafy greens, if you're putting spinach in your smoothie instead of kale, for example, there's a lot of oxalic acid in spinach, so you're not going to absorb as much you'll only absorb about 5% of the
So,
calcium.
what's the best leafy
So
green then?
the best leafy greens are kale. So the ones that are high in oxalates, maybe you should start that way. Swiss chard, beet greens, and spinach. Not good sources of calcium. Even though they've got high numbers, you can't absorb much of the calcium
Okay.
from those foods. But other greens are fine, like kale and bok choy and all. Most of the Chinese greens and turnip greens and all of those are great. And then the other nutrients to think about are iron and zinc. And zinc, again, both of those nutrients, legumes, nuts, and seeds. So those are key sources of those nutrients. And then the other thing that I would say, just to be somewhat conscious of, is certainly iodine is a very important one. If you're not using iodized salt, you need a source of iodine, because you're not generally going to get enough unless you're a regular seaweed eater. And so if you eat seaweed, you're going to get tons of iodine. But if you're not, then I would suggest an iodine supplement of 150 micrograms a day.
Okay.
And then one other nutrient that I think is worth mentioning, and this is very controversial, but I feel quite strongly about it, is omega-3 fatty acids. And vegans and plant-based eaters can get enough alpha-linolenic acid from flaxseed and chia seed and hemp seed and walnuts and so forth. But we must rely on conversion then of ALA to the longer chain, more biologically active EPA and DHA, which are docosahexaenoic acid and docosahexaenoic acid, which are much more biologically active. These are the raw materials with which we build our resolvins and protectants and all of these very potent chemicals that control our body systems and help with blood pressure and inflammation and all of those things. And so if we don't convert ALA very well to these long chain omega-3s, then it could impact over time our cognitive function. It could impact a number of health markers, and
Mm,
so heart health and so forth. And so I suggest that people take an EPA DHA supplement, and that doesn't mean taking fish oil. Fish actually don't even get their EPA and DHA. They don't make EPA and DHA. They get it from microalgae, these little plants in
right.
the ocean. And so now we're culturing the microalgae and extracting the EPA and DHA, and then we can, get it directly from the source.
Yeah. Cut
We
out the
don't
middleman,
cut
the
out the
middle
middle.
fish.
Exactly. And we don't have to rape the oceans of fish. We don't, it's not contaminated with mercury or any of that. So I think that's a very fine option. And in my view, the evidence isn't all there yet. We need more research desperately on this topic.
Hmm.
But the evidence to me is strong enough to suggest advantages to supplementing. And the level
Yeah.
of supplementation I would recommend would be around the at least 300 to 500 milligrams a day for pregnant and lactating women, and at least 200 of that being DHA. And then for other adults, I would recommend at least 200 to 300 a day, probably better to be around the 500 a day. If you've done an omega-3 index test and it comes back that you're very low, you probably need 1,000 to 1,500
Okay.
milligrams a day to get up to where,
Yeah.
the recommended 8,
Hmm.
the 8% on the omega-3 index.
Yeah. Done such a good job of talking us through what nutrients we need for aging well. Now I just want to ask you some fun questions. I
Oh,
always ask
awesome.
like what's your best piece of advice for aging well, but I think you already gave that with the leading the purposeful life and
Yes,
being compassionate.
exactly.
So, but what's the best piece of advice you've ever received? Not age related, just best piece of advice.
Well, I would, there's so many pieces of advice you receive over your lifetime, but when I was a little girl, my mom always told me to treat everyone with kindness and respect, no exceptions. And she would say, if you don't have anything good to say about someone, don't say anything at all. And boy, did she live that. I have never heard her
Really?
say a bad thing about anyone in my entire life.
Really?
And it had really a profound impact on how I approached my life. And I think kindness and compassion connect us with other people regardless of social, personal, cultural, background, age, gender, sexual orientation. And I've traveled to a lot of countries, and it helps us to me to recognize and respect our common humanity. And to me, this is just a really good starting point for a meaningful life.
That's beautiful. Wow. And are your parents still alive?
My mom is 87 on Sunday, so she just in a few days she'll turn 87. And I have to say, she is the most beautiful 87-year-old I have ever seen. And she exercises just about every day. She curls on Friday. She does yoga. She goes to the gym, does, gentle fitness classes. She walks all the time. She's in amazing shape.
That's
She's just, yeah, she's
beautiful.
an inspiration for sure.
Does she live near you?
She does. So I go over to her place almost every day or every second day for sure. So she's about maybe an 8-minute drive, and my grandchildren are about 2 blocks away. So I'm very fortunate to have a lot of family close by.
That's nice and
Yeah.
intergenerational too. I think
Yeah.
that's helpful for everybody.
But my dad,
Um,
my dad passed away about 13 years ago, and it's interesting because my mom has never smoked. She is always exercised. She doesn't like fast food. She doesn't like junk food. She doesn't like chips or soda. She can't stand that stuff. Never has. And look at her. She's like the picture of health. My dad was the opposite. He was like a bigger than life, passionate person, and everything had to be big. He was easily stressed. He had high blood pressure, and he developed heart disease and diabetes and all of that. He ended up on dialysis for the last 11 years of his life. And he,
Oh.
he was tended to be sedentary. He, all of that, and I could just see the difference in how their lifestyle choices impacted their quality of life. It was just remarkable.
Those are remarkable lessons from watching your parents age.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite person that you admire for their, like a public person that you admire for their approach to aging?
Oh, absolutely. And that would be Jane Goodall. I mean,
Yeah.
I admire so much about her, but I think where aging is concerned, she set a really high bar for the
Yes.
world. She is rooted in purpose. She's actively engaged. She's connected to nature. She's hopeful. She has this open mindset. And to me, she is just proof positive that age is not a limitation, but an opportunity to share our wisdom and knowledge, and to demonstrate that, to me, she demonstrates that you're never too old to make a real difference in this world.
Oh yeah, she's still going strong. She's
Oh,
incredible.
she is
Ugh.
incredible.
And by the way, when I asked this question to Juliana Hever, she said you were her inspiration.
Oh, oh, well, that's very
Isn't
touching.
that nice?
Oh.
And then do you have a favorite health or beauty product?
Well, you're going to laugh because I think my favorite is a jump rope. Um,
Oh,
I, I love my jump rope because when I'm traveling, it takes no room in my suitcase, even if I have a little, one of those carry-on bags, and it can give me a fantastic workout in like 15 or 20 minutes. So it is my favorite little, health promoting tool.
that is a good one. I have not heard that one before, and I agree with that. Gosh. Okay, another thing. I used to jump rope, and now I don't know what happened to my jump rope, and I guess in addition to my HIIT class, I got to do jump rope now.
It's awesome.
And what's your favorite concert you've ever been to?
Well, you know what? I have to admit that I am not a big concert goer because I find concerts hard to justify financially. They're
Yes, they're
so expensive.
expensive.
But I have seen a handful, and I think that of the ones I've seen, Brian Adams was my favorite.
Oh yeah.
Brian Adams is a well-known vegan, but
Is he
he.
vegan?
Oh yeah, he's been for years, and
Oh,
he is just such a talented musician. I
I
love it.
love him.
Now, if somebody said to me, "I'm going to gift you with a ticket to any concert that you would really like to see," I think I would pick Elton John. I
Oh
would
yeah.
love to see Elton
I
John.
think you might be a tiny bit late for that. He
I
stopped
think,
touring,
oh,
but
but yeah,
he's
yeah.
incredible.
Oh, he
I
is.
actually have seen him. I saw
You
him
have?
with Billy Joel, and they had their
Wow.
pianos together. Oh, that was
That
maybe one
must
of the
have been,
best.
oh,
It,
that
yeah,
must have been incredible.
yeah. It was a long time ago, but that was an incredible concert.
Wow.
Oh, well, Brenda, thank you so much for talking to me and sharing your knowledge with us. And
Well, thank
Juliana
you.
didn't lie. You're
Uh,
wonderful. I
well,
appreciate you.
thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you for all the work that you're doing to spread the knowledge of so many people, including yourself, to the world. So thank you so much for that,
Oh,
and thank
thank
you for
you.
inviting me.
Oh, you take care.
You too.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thanks for listening, friend. From my heart to yours, be well until we meet again.